I mean, look what's happening now. You know, Putin is like a sort of abusive husband who punches his wife as hard as he possibly can in the face for two reasons: to show her how much he loves her and to get her to love him.
How do you stop Putin? It's a question I threw at former Ambassador Charles Crawford, who spent most of his diplomatic career in the heart of Central and Eastern Europe during the transition from communism to democratic pluralism. Crawford's analogy certainly doesn't come from a diplomat's handbook and will outrage some of you and surprise others. It's left me feeling quite depressed. Your diplomatic career took you into the heart of Central and Eastern Europe as countries moved from communism to democratic pluralism, and you were the ambassador to Belgrade and Warsaw between 2001 and 2007. So coming from that background to where we are today, are you surprised by the events that have unfolded?
Wow. Well, I think, yes, I am surprised but then I think that's the part of the point of, if you can call it this Putinism, is that he uses the fact you're not going to be surprised to surprise you. You know, because he keeps upping the ante and you think, well, okay, he's an ex-Crimea and he won't do this and he won't do that. Then he does it, you know, and it's just each time it's astonishing because it's so, you know, dangerous and almost weird, I think, in a way. This is the point. I mean, you know, what are we talking about here? We're talking about stealing other people's land and shooting the people on it to get that land. I mean, it's just sort of theft, you know, but you know, and I can understand, you know, terrorists or gangsters doing this, but having a permanent member of the Security Council invading another country to steal its land is an extraordinary thing. We've seen nothing like this since the Second World War. I mean, it's literally unprecedented. So in that sense, yes, I'm surprised.
Right. The only reason I asked that is because you have been giving analysis since you've left the Foreign Office, and you've given some pretty strong articles warning of, well, you've just called it Putinism. It's as though you were reading the signs going back certainly 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's, look, I mean, Yvonne, the basic issue really is, I mean, when you have these podcasts and you talk about things, you want to try and find out what the basic issue is. That's sort of interesting. And it's quite hard to work out what it is. On the diplomatic level, it's because when the Cold War ended, we didn't really have a way of redefining Europe to bring in Russia and all these other countries. And I think, you know, and I would argue this, I think the West, if you want to call it that, made a mistake, which is that the EU and NATO were both in one way or the other phenomena of the Cold War. And when the Cold War ended, we should have thought about, okay, well, let's wind these down and wind up something else, which is more in the spirit of the new situation. But I think, you know, you don't want to be too cynical about it, but I think it was just too difficult, and the bureaucracies in these organizations and the people who founded the EU felt they were building something very, very special. And if you just diluted it too much, as the wicked Brits might suggest, then it wouldn't be the EU anymore. It wouldn't have that sort of messianic European goal. So you ended up, I mean, what it boiled down to was there were too many countries and not enough clubs. And so what's gradually happened is we've added a few more countries here and there, and quite a lot of countries in 2004 to certainly the EU club. And before that, we added them to the NATO club, because NATO is actually quite easy to join. You just have to promise to have a transparent army and not fight, and then you're sort of in. With the EU, there's tens of thousands of regulations you have to pass and adopt and show that you're serious. So in a way, the paradox of the whole situation was it was the wrong way round. What you really wanted to do was to make economic integration easy and military integration very, very slow. But we ended up doing it the other way around just because of the way the organizations worked. And that meant that Russia and Ukraine, anyway, were was sort of left outside, as were, you know, Belarus and lots of the other Soviet republics.
But you'd been in the diplomatic corps about 10 years before the 1989 signing of the agreement by US President Donald Reagan's Secretary of State, James Baker, and the West German Foreign Minister, Hans-Dietrich Gessner. And that agreement was endorsed by Britain and France, that if Russia allowed Germany to be unified, NATO would not be extended beyond the new borders. So
I'm not sure. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure of the detail of that. I'm not sure if your interpretation is right. But there was also the, you know, the famous occasion when Yeltsin met Lech Wałęsa. And Lech Wałęsa said, "Do you mind if we join these things?" And Yeltsin said, "No, you're a free country. Do what the hell you like." But I think the problem isn't really the membership of these things, because Putin knows. I mean, Putin's argument the other day, which I saw on YouTube, he said, if Ukraine joins NATO and invades Crimea, you'll be involved in Article 5 so fast you won't be able to blink. This is a completely stupid, dishonest, absurd argument, and he knows it's those things. If he really wants Ukraine not to invade Crimea, Ukraine joining NATO would be the best possible thing to stop that happening, because the Ukrainians would say to everyone else, "Oh, if we invade Crimea, will you invoke Article 5? And everyone would say, "Are you out of your complete tiny minds?" So it just wouldn't happen. So
what's he up to then? What's
well, this is the point. So I think that, well, I was in Budapest the other day, just before it all kicked off, and I was talking to someone who'd met an Estonian diplomat who talked to one of Putin's ideologues, and he asked that question, you know, where does it end? And this guy, Putin, a close Putin advisor, said, "When you stop us." Now, this is what I meant by there's a sort of diplomatic, what is the basic issue here? The basic issue is, how do we make Europe sort of fit with so many different countries and, you know, different levels of development and so on. But there's a psychological aspect to this, which is that and I really do think this, that the Russians have a serious problem, which is for most of the 20th century, they were governed by a totally disastrous, cruel government who killed millions of Russians. And the people who did that, they're still in places of honor in Red Square. So on the one hand, you want to sort of somehow or other, you can't deny the sacrifices of the Russians in the Second World War and all that stuff. And yet, on the other hand, you had 70 years of this nonsense, at the end of which you couldn't buy a banana in Moscow because there were no bananas. So this was a sort of existential failure. And Putin, I think, comes from the people who did very well from that existential failure, namely the KGB people who made a lot of money because they were smart when the whole thing ended. So there's a psychological drama about Russia's sort of what it is in itself. And I just think it's awful when you see these, you know, Russian diplomats, or you see these Russian soldiers, officers or whatever. They're defending a regime in the name of a sort of approach that killed their own relatives. This is very dark, you know. So when you're trying to figure out how you respond to that, it's actually very, very complicated, because you don't quite know what you're dealing with, because it's so weird. And I think I mean, look what's happening now. You know, Putin is like a sort of abusive husband who punches his wife as hard as he possibly can in the face for two reasons: to show her how much he loves her and to get her to love him. You know, he's smashing Ukraine. He's smashing Ukraine in the name of sort of Slavic unity of some sort, and to denazify Ukraine when they've just, elected a Jewish president. I mean, it's so weird, but he knows it's weird, and that's another way of keeping us all off balance. So he doesn't care that it's weird.
We're looking at a military strategy and also a psychological strategy as well.
Absolutely.
Drawing on all of your experience, if you got a phone call from Boris Johnson tonight, what would you advise him to do? Or what would you advise NATO?
I'd advise him to resign because of his COVID policy. That's the first thing I'd do. But if he refuses to do that, I mean, it's actually very hard, because I say this on my negotiation classes, when you look at cultural aspects of negotiation. The Russians have one or two very specific sort of, I don't know what the word is, approaches, which we don't have. And it boils down to this. They say, listen, we can take more pain than you can inflict. And second, however hard you hit us, we will hit you back harder. So just say, we say, okay, Russia, you're banned from the SWIFT banking system, which means, they'll have a real mess. And don't forget, the Ukrainian intervention has cost them trillions of dollars already. You're not talking a few billion here and there. You're talking a couple of $1 trillion of lost growth because of these policies. And yet he keeps going. In fact, he's got even worse. So the economic sanctions sort of don't really matter, and personal sanctions against him and anyone else are just a joke. It's just,
So how do you stop him?
Well, what I was going to say was, maybe you don't, and this is the risk that if you cut off them from the SWIFT banking system, which would be a major hammer blow to the Russian economy, they may say, fine, okay, in that case, we'll cut you off from the NHS and your power systems by using cyber warfare against every piece of infrastructure you've got. And they've got a lot of people, probably ready to do that. And we probably have slightly fewer people ready to do it to them. So they are prepared to hit back with whatever it takes. And this makes them extremely dangerous. And, feeling your way forward in this situation it's even worse than the Cold War, I think, because in the Cold War, both sides were it was very sort of static and sort of rational. I mean, you could apply normal game theory to it on some sort of level at Harvard if you wanted to. But this, I just don't know. I mean, obviously he's got to feel, probably the best thing you can possibly do is flood Ukraine with weapons so that every Ukrainian who can shoot at anyone coming over the border has a chance to get someone. There's a lot of Ukrainians. It's a big country. You're not talking, 2 or 3 million. You're talking 30 million plus people. And it's very, very difficult for Russia to take over that country if they all resist.
Well, it will end up in a guerrilla warfare situation.
Well, sure, no, it'd be horrendous. But the casualties would be horrendous. But then, what do we want to do? Do we really want to threaten to nuke Moscow because of this? I don't think so. And plus they would probably nuke us. So, but the fact we're having this conversation is pretty damn serious.
Is there any crumb of comfort you can give out of all of this?
Well, I hope no, not really. I think the crumb of comfort is that the Ukrainians seem to be fighting back, and maybe, I don't think this will be popular in Russia. The number of people demonstrating is tiny because, they're threatened with arrest and beatings and torture and so on. But the actual great mass of Russians don't have a problem with the Ukrainians, and Russia's got a lot of land. Why are we fighting over these ridiculous things? The average Russian is a decent fellow and decent woman. So this won't be that popular even in Russia. And there may be people down the corridor from Putin who are wondering, again, where this ends. Are we just, has he actually lost the plot? Is this too much? So the only crumb of comfort I would offer is the dim possibility that someone in his own team may launch some sort of coup and topple him. And that may not happen, in the next 2 or 3 years, but it's still relatively young, but it could happen, if all this it doesn't really look as if it's paid off. And I think the problem he has is that he hasn't got a clear, principled, sort of semi-reasonable outcome, which the world could sort of glumly accept, which means that it's paid off for him.
Well, Charles Crawford, thank you very much for your brilliant analysis, as grim as it was. And let's hope next time we speak that there's some light at the end of this tunnel. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks a lot.
Does anyone have a solution? Listen to the experts and then join in the conversation on the comments page. But don't forget to subscribe first.